Call this work session to order. We'll start with introductions. Mr. Gates.
Brad Dyson.
Forrest Dunbar.
Big Train.
Suzanne Press. Austin Findanza.
P. Peterson. John Weddleton.
Felix, are you in the back there? Okay. There's sandwiches in the back if anybody would like them. So, I apologize. Still getting over what afflicted me yesterday. It's not because I'm not interested. I'm just struggling a little bit. So today we're going to be talking about an ordinance proposed by the mayor and several members of the assembly to have put forward an initiative or a ballot initiative, charter amendment, to the people of Anchorage asking if they want a retail sale on alcoholic beverages. Is there a presentation from the administration?
There is, Mr. Chair.
Will you be giving it?
Yes, I will.
Could you identify yourself for the record?
My name is Ona Brous. I'm Chief of Staff for the Mayor.
Thank you. Please proceed.
I need to get set up real quick.
No worries.
Great.
Is there anybody online?
Oh, this one's.
Are you going to do a PowerPoint?
Yeah.
For the record, we've been joined by Mr. Rivera. Chris, you want to get the lights?
We have two other versions. So copies of those.
I'm sorry. What's this now?
Two versions. I have one. And I posted online.
Oh, really? Okay. I'm sorry. I didn't realize that. Have those been laid out? Where's Lisa?
Yeah.
There are S versions in the binder.
Yeah, there should be only one S version.
Yes.
We
Okay.
have copies. But yours is posted.
Yes. I got it.
Ha.
Wired mouse.
I don't even know how to do that.
It's just in time. Yeah.
So are they handing out the S version first, or?
I don't know. Lisa, do we have the S version available for folks?
Yes, we do. I think we left it upstairs.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I think so.
Please proceed.
Okay. To the chair and the assembly members, I want to say thank you for having us here today. I'd also like to thank the sponsors of this ordinance, Mr. Trainee, Mr. Rivera, and Mr. Croft, who we have been able to work with over the last few months to get to this point. We're here today to discuss AO number 2018-104, the ballot proposal for retail sales of alcohol within the municipality of Anchorage. I'm gonna take you back a little bit first and show you this gentleman. This gentleman is Arthur Pagoo. Obviously, he is no longer with us. He was an economist in England and is thought of as one of the more revered economists of his time. And one of the principles that he worked on and developed is the idea of a Pigouvian tax. A Pigouvian tax is a tax on any market activity that generates negative externalities, which are costs not included in the market price. The tax is intended to correct an undesirable or inefficient market outcome and does so by being set equal to the social cost of the negative externalities. In the presence of negative externalities, the social cost of a market activity is not covered by the private cost of the activity and then is borne by the public and private sector together. So in this situation, what is considered an externality? These numbers here are for the entire state of Alaska. Anchorage-specific information is a little more difficult to come by, but this is pretty easy to extrapolate based on population. We're about 40% of the population of the state, and depending on the statistic, we are either equal to or more than 40% of these costs. So specifically attributable to alcohol and alcohol misuse within the state of Alaska. These numbers are from the McDowell Group report to the Alaska Mental Health Trust in 2016. We have productivity losses, which are $775 million when quantified, including work and missed wages, vehicle traffic collisions, anything from criminal activity down to simple fender benders, $594 million. Criminal justice and protective services costs, $270 million. Healthcare costs, $182 million. Public assistance and social services costs, $15 million. Underage drinking costs, $349.6 million. The number of deaths attributable to alcohol and alcohol misuse in the state of Alaska between 2012 and 2016 was 730 people. Anchorage is 42.5% of that number, or 310 people during that time. It totals $1.84 billion in costs. And while the private sector bears the majority of this cost, the public sector bears 42.9% of this cost between federal, state, and local governments. It's a pretty big number.
I'm sorry, is that annually?
This is annually. In order to combat those negative externalities, a lot of times people propose an alcohol tax, which is what we are talking about today. The structure of the proposal from the administration and Mr. Trainee, Mr. Rivera, and Mr. Croft is an amendment to the Anchorage Municipal Charter. It's a 5% flat rate tax. It would include all retail businesses that sell alcohol, bars, restaurants, package stores. Approval of this ordinance sends the question to voters to ask them if they see this as a appropriate collection point for resources to combat the issues that the Assembly, the public, the administration have been hearing about for decades. And more specifically, in our time here in the last 3.5 years, it is in the top 2 of issues we discussed. Approval means the voters have the chance to say whether or not they want to pay this fee. It goes to the public vote in April 2019, if approved by the Assembly, with implementation proposed for January of 2020. The effect of the proposal on the consumers, the payers of this fee, is an estimated annual average cost between $36 and $50 per person. I don't know about the people in this room, but I think I personally, if I were told that if I gave $50 to a cause and would be able to make improvements in my community, I would pay that immediately. It's a 5% retail tax. It's 40 cents on an $8 six-pack of beer. 50 cents on a $10 mixed drink at a bar, $1.75 on a $30 bottle of wine, and $2.50 on a $50 bottle of liquor. That's 6 cents a beer. One of the good things about this is that it is completely visible to the consumer. It is a sales tax on alcohol. It will be shown on the receipt as what it is and the dollar amount that it is. It is not a wholesale tax. It is not hidden behind the cost of the good. You know what you're paying for and you know why you're paying for it. It's paid in total by the individual consumers who purchase these products. This proposal requires the approval of the registered voters in Anchorage, who are the consumers. It doesn't include the hospitality industry, the tourism industry, who comes and uses all of the things that we currently pay for. They also would pay into this and contribute to improving our community with these specific issues. On retail taxes, there's a particular impact to two groups. Underage drinkers and heavy drinkers tend to be more significantly impacted than any other group. How does it affect the retailers? This is for the chairman. The demand for alcohol is inelastic. It's an economic principle of whether or not the demand for the commodity fluctuates based on price. And the demand for alcohol does not decrease in significant terms when the price increases. Alcohol is already a regulated industry. I know there's a lot of people from the industry here in this room, and we all know that there are rules, statutes, regulations, paperwork that are required to be filled out at the federal and state level. Adding this to the paperwork that is filled out would equate to point of sale adaptations, adjusting their cash registers and the way they sell their items, which I think most retail businesses do on a regular basis when they hold sales or they add a different product. It's not a difficult thing to do. There would be some additional accounting for them to do, which can be done quite a bit by your point of sale system, but you have to do monthly reports and monthly payments to the municipality. The marijuana industry currently pays a bond deposit to MOA Treasury before 2 years of operation where they comply with payment of their taxes, which then it can be released. So we believe that there would be a similar requirement for this kind of retail tax, a bond deposit with Treasury, which after some proven amount of good behavior would be released. There are retail alcohol taxes currently in 10 other Alaska communities. They vary from 3 to 12% depending on the community. The larger communities that are more comparable to Anchorage are Juneau and Fairbanks North Star Borough, City of Fairbanks. City of Fairbanks and Fairbanks North Star Borough both levy 5% individually, one within the city, and then anything outside of the city with the borough. And Juneau pays 3%, but they also have a 5% sales tax. The total amount of money that those 10 communities in Alaska raise on an annual basis is $5.4 million. One of the most important things here for us and for this community is what Brown Jug is doing. And I think the Assembly is aware, most of you have probably seen the letter. For those of you that in the room who have not seen the letter, the CEO of Alcana, who is the parent company of Brown Jug, has put forward a letter to the administration and the Assembly saying, we fully support this tax. In a conversation with one of their senior vice presidents, he said, we aren't selling golf balls or socks. We're selling a highly regulated product, and with that comes corporate social responsibility. Here's a big question. How much money will it raise? A 5% municipal-wide retail tax on alcohol is projected to raise between $11 and $15 million annually. These are estimates that MOA Treasury has done based on the taxes in other jurisdictions within the state. You'll see the line across at 5% that says 11, 13, 15. That's currently what the marijuana industry is paying as a retail tax. We tax rental vehicles at 8%. We tax hotel rooms at 12%. What's not on this list, because it wouldn't fit, is what we tax tobacco at. The combined state and local tax on tobacco is 125%. The three leading causes of preventable death in the United States are diet and exercise, tobacco, and alcohol. This is Treasury's spreadsheet. Sorry, you can't see the top of it right here. This is the calculations on the tax levies in the other jurisdictions that are most comparable to ours. Juneau, Fairbanks, North Scarborough, outside of North Pole, North Pole's levy, the city of Fairbanks, and then all of the Fairbanks, North Scarborough, including everybody up at the top. You'll see the off to the side are the year counts, then you have the population base, the retail tax rate, the alcoholic beverage tax revenues, the estimated retail taxable sales, and then the estimated per capita annual taxable sales. In some of the conversations I've had with people in going through these numbers, when I say, yeah, it's going to cost you about $50 a year, and they say, that means I spend $1,000 on alcohol. I don't spend $1,000 on alcohol in a year, but when you break it down on a monthly basis, you know, you go out and you have a drink with dinner, or you buy a bottle of wine when you're going to a friend's house. It's anywhere between, I think, $30 and $60 and $70 a month. It breaks out pretty easy. This is specifically for Anchorage based on those numbers. So our population number based on the estimated retail sales, comparison low, comparison high, per capita count, $725 annually to $993 annually expenditure. Those are monthly counts, so $60 to $83. The estimated annual average cost per person is $36 to $50. That's going to fluctuate. Maybe you don't drink at all. It's zero. Maybe you drink a lot. It's going to be more. One of the important parts of this proposal is that this revenue is entirely dedicated to the issues that we have heard the community wants the money put towards. The state cannot dedicate revenues. Local governments, the municipality of Anchorage, can. And that's what we're proposing to do with this. This language is included in the ballot proposition. The net receipts from the retail sales on alcoholic beverages after payment of the costs of administration, collection, and audit to the municipality are dedicated to alcohol and substance misuse prevention and treatment, community behavioral health programs, public safety, and homelessness prevention and response, including abatement of prohibited campsites. It's subject to assembly approval every year. Every year you will get this dollar amount in front of you with a list of projects proposed by the administration and the decision to change those items based on the progress that is being made and what you think the community needs to focus on. Possible projects that fall under these categories that are things that the Assembly, the administration, and the community have been talking about for years include things like this. Something along the lines of an Alaska Center for Treatment. A large treatment facility to accommodate the community and the needs of the community in a way that will actually be effective and resolve some of this substance abuse, alcohol abuse issues that we have. Prevention programs, education programs, that is very big in fighting this fight. Making sure that people understand the effects, what happens, how to help family members is a way to solve this problem. Homelessness issues. Our homelessness meetings usually have twice the number of people that are in this room attend. It is a significant issue in this city. I believe, and I think Nancy can correct me if I'm wrong, that we have twice the rate of homelessness per capita than the rest of the country. There are projects that Mr. Rivera and other assembly members have discussed in their committee meetings. Additional camp abatement staff and resources, making sure that we have enough people who can spend time walking around, connecting with the people who are illegally camping, making sure that they have resources that they need, that they're aware of the resources that are available to them, and connecting them to get them off of the streets. Storage for personal property seized at camp abatements. One of the reasons we have lag times in camp cleanups is because legally we are not required to dispose of the things collected there unless we give a very long period of notice for people to leave. We can turn that into a 72-hour process if we have the capacity to store and return goods to the people who want them back. Housing and support services is key to this resolution. That is one of the issues that is keeping us from being able to make the progress that we need to make. There is not enough affordable, supported housing in this community to help the community that is the most vulnerable. Legally, we are required to have shelter available when we kick people out of their camps, year-round. If the shelters are full and we abate a camp, that is illegal. They do not have a place to go. There are court cases on this. We are not interested in entering into the liability associated with that. So having a year-round overflow shelter and specifically cold weather shelter is very important to be able to tackle this problem. Community behavioral health items. We established a program called the Mobile Intervention Team, I think a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago at this point. It is extremely successful. It includes social workers, fire department employees, police department employees, and mental health professionals who perform crisis intervention and stabilization duties in the field on a daily basis with the people who need them most. We'd like to increase those teams, but we need the resources to do it. We'd also like to expand the Anchorage Safety Patrol coverage area. I think a lot of people know who ASP is and what they do. They perform a very valuable service, but it is in a very limited portion of town. We'd like to be able to perform that service all over town. This isn't the only thing that we can pay for with this money, but this is the limited set of issues that the funding can be used for. A lot of people want to know how they know. How are they going to know how the money is spent? The existing budget process, as the Assembly knows, includes detailed proposals from the administration, amendment and approval from the Assembly through public input, and this dedicated revenue source would require the exact same process. We envision proposing the first year with very specific line items, costs associated, outcomes associated, and have that be part of the budget process conversation for 2020. SAP budget controls. It's a good thing. The way the SAP system works and the way our accounts are set up here, this dedicated revenue would be loaded into the budget in a fund center. That fund center would then have all of the approved line items from the Assembly loaded into that budget specifically. It's like a grant. You know, you're going to spend this much on supplies. You're going to spend this much on equipment. We're going to spend this much on the Anchorage Safety Patrol. We're going to spend this much on bonding to build a new building. We're going to spend this much. All of those things are loaded into a budget. And when those costs come in and are paid, they are put against that budget. Budget to actuals comes in. If you try and charge to this account something that has not been approved by the Assembly and loaded into the budget by OMB, it will be rejected. Those reports will be available to the Assembly. They're available to the Assembly right now if you wanted them for specific things. But this in particular would be part of a detailed annual report, or more frequently, Mr. Weddleton's S version, I think, says at the request of the Assembly, or however frequently, and that's absolutely acceptable. It's not particularly difficult to, I apologize for what I'm about to say, to get SAP to kick out this report. It's true, we can do it. But the best thing about this is that it's appropriated annually. So it will allow for regular adjustment, annual basis, based on progress and public input. If 5 to 10 years from now we have decreased our homeless population in a significant way, the Assembly and the administration will be able to determine whether or not we should spend more money on behavioral health or diversion or education. It's flexible within the bounds of the ballot language. These are some of the questions that I've heard from people while we've been talking about this over the last few months. Doesn't the state tax alcohol already? Yes, the state has a wholesale tax on alcohol. The last time the state tax was changed was 2002. In 2002, when they increased the wholesale tax, they also created the, I believe it's the Alcohol and Substance Abuse Treatment Fund. And in 2002, they determined that the state wholesale tax will be split in half. Half of it goes into the general fund. The other half of it goes into this Alcohol and Substance Abuse Treatment Fund. The state raises $40 million annually. $40 million for a $1.8 billion problem. Only 50% of it is dedicated towards treatment and education. Why just alcohol? I showed you before that it's not just alcohol. We tax other things. This proposal is specific to alcohol. This municipality does not levy a tax on alcohol. We levy a tax on cigarettes. We levy a tax on beds. We levy a tax on rental vehicles. This is a proposal to use the sale of alcohol as a collection point to raise resources to solve a problem that this community has. If it's such a good idea, why change from 60 to 50% voter approval? The state constitution says that charter amendments at local governments should be decided by the majority of the voters. Isn't this a workaround of the tax cap? No. This is not a workaround of the tax cap. The tax cap is intact, and it will stay intact. This is the administration and the sponsors looking the Assembly, the voters of the city, and the tax cap dead in the face and saying, you have told us this is a problem. We have told you we need resources to solve it. Is this how you want to do it? It is their choice to say yes or no. What we would like is for the Assembly and the public to have this conversation and determine if you see value in sending this to the voters to decide for themselves if they see the value in resolving this issue. That's all I got.
Someone turn the lights on, please. Note for the record, we've been joined by Mr. Croft and Mr. Constant. Questions for Ona. I'll start with you, Mr. Weddleton.
So I got 4, so you could cut me off if you want. One thing, can we do it at the wholesale level just for simplicity? It's complicated to have hundreds of business reporting.
We don't levy a wholesale tax, so if we wanted to jump on to the state's process, I'm not sure what that might entail. Maybe Ms. Wynn-Pearson, or if someone from Treasury is here, they'd be able to answer that. We discussed that, but part of the conversation is showing people what they're paying and where it's going, and wholesale taxes are hidden. The federal government last year cut the alcohol industry's taxes by 16%. Anybody see that? That was a wholesale tax. We haven't seen any of that. So wholesale taxes aren't as transparent as retail taxes are.
When you said that, you said visibility is important, and as a purchaser, like I buy gasoline, I have not a clue how much of that's tax. I don't care, I just want to fill up. Why is that important?
Why is visibility important? I believe it's important to the public to know what they're paying and what they're paying for. And like I said, wholesale taxes can change and fluctuate. That, I believe, is more burdensome to the alcohol industry than a retail tax that we see and pay for. If we wholesale the alcohol industry, then they're going to have to push the prices up, and there's no explanation as to the consumer as to why that's happening.
Mr. Gates?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's a state law that says municipalities can only tax alcoholic beverages by levying a property tax or a retail sales tax. So we're not allowed to levy wholesale. I'm sorry, not wholesale, but an excise tax, which is what the state's tax is. We can levy a wholesale sales tax, which I think you might be asking.
Right, that's what
And I wanted to make sure we're distinguishing excise tax, which is usually applied to wholesale.
Thank you, Mr. Gates. Mr.
Now
Weddleton?
you want to take turns. Okay, so another, you said demand was inelastic, which I suspect is probably true, but I've also heard from people who really support an alcohol tax. They say if you raise the price, people will drink less, particularly kids. So I don't know.
And that's true, because it becomes a higher proportion of their disposable income. So your average drinker isn't going to see a difference in 50 cents on a six-pack or $1.50 on a bottle of wine. That's a pretty, moderate level of drinking. Kids who don't have, jobs like the rest of us, it's a little harder to come by more money to pay for that alcohol. Heavy drinkers are also affected that way because it becomes a larger portion of their income than your average drinker.
Well, perhaps, but extrapolating from your numbers, the average kid is spending $725 a year on booze, and that's a lot. So, anyway, so you said a bond deposit. So right out the gate, they have to put a bond deposit on their tax. So how much would that be, and why not just not do that? And if someone doesn't pay, then you put a bond deposit.
And that's completely up for discussion. Currently, the marijuana industry pays a $10,000 bond when they register with the city to sell marijuana. And the 2-year threshold on good behavior exists. Until we actually have this conversation with the community and whether or not it's approved, the bond conversation would happen after. This comes back to the Assembly after approval of the voters. The Assembly still has to create an ordinance to codify this after the ballot is approved, the same way the marijuana tax came back.
Mr. Weddleton?
You said that this is subject to Assembly approval each year, and I don't see that in the ordinance.
It's an appropriation. So the same way all appropriations are subject to Assembly approval when we go through our budget process, these funds would be as well.
I mean, the funds is the tax. We could also decide this be done with tax. The tax on there. It's how we spend the money.
Correct.
But the tax is on there.
The tax is on there.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Anyone else? Questions for Ms. Browse?
We also have other representatives. We have Natasha Pineda, the Anchorage Health Department Director, Nancy Burke, and the Homelessness Coordinator,
And we have
Melina and Rosa, and I believe Treasury is somewhere around here. We have, okay.
Miss-
Yeah, there's Liz.
Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Browse, for the presentation. So, some feedback that I've been getting from folks is a concern about the language regarding revenue and the uses of it being somewhat general, or there's a concern that as we discussed, it won't be used for what the intention is. So if this were to pass and we were to go and to create an ordinance, then would we include some more specifics then about how the funds would be used, or if there would be metrics, and how do we, determine as a community what is our most pressing problem, or how would we measure our need for treatment beds in the community?
I think, I'm not sure if that, I don't know if Becky can answer any specifics about that. I don't think that you necessarily would want to codify that kind of language. It could be resolution language from the assembly about how you would want it to be spent. Like I said, one of the best things about this proposal is that it can fluctuate based on assembly and public input. So we all lived through the homelessness and flower conversation a couple of months ago, and those kinds of decisions, when the public decides that you aren't spending this money right, we don't think this is working, they will tell you, and we can change.
Thank you, Ms. Browse. Ms. Wynn-Pearson?
Yeah, if I might add, Mr. Chair, there will be, as Ms. Ross has already mentioned, there will be several additional layers of documentation of what happens here and opportunities for the Assembly to weigh in on how the specific funds are directed. I think the goal was to create sufficiently general language of the charter that would allow for that additional specificity in the ordinance through which you would adopt the actual tax itself, and then again, additional specificity each year in the budgeting process regarding where those funds should be directed, which again is subject, in each of those instances there are multiple opportunities for the public to weigh in, multiple opportunities for this body to make specific choices and decisions about how those funds should be directed, without having to go back to the voters in the instance where you find where new programs evolve that may fall slightly outside the bounds of very specific language. If we were to take the tactic of much more specific language in the charter, we have to go back to the voters each time. Again, here there's a little bit more flexibility in the charter to allow for that specificity in the different layers of review of the body.
And I would like to discuss, if it's okay with the chair, the C that goes along with the administration's version, the summary of economic effects. Treasury's preparation of that document shows that the cost associated for the municipality, I can find my version of it, there it is, would be an initial capital purchase for the software to actually manage this incoming revenue, and then one additional person to be able to manage this specific revenue source. So you'll see the total direct costs on the C are about equal on an annual basis, the first year for the capital outlay and then the following years for personnel.
Thank you, Ms. Brass. Other questions for the administration? Mr. Trainee. Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Dyson and then Mr. Trainee. He was in the queue.
Thank you. If somebody asked me if this was a workaround on account, I'd say this is what the cap provides for. Voters can approve what it's not. It can produce a change, but it's not
Correct.
sneaky.
Yep.
Couldn't be more upfront. And on how do you know where it's going to go? We have significant audit capacity, and I would be surprised if we don't audit to see where it happens. And if we don't trust our own, we can contract with some very good audit firms. So.
Through the chair to Mr. Dyson, I agree with you. I was actually thinking about that yesterday. Mike Chadwick and his internal audit team, this is what they do every year. They choose specific issues within the municipality and within our departments to audit.
Yeah, we don't trust you. We got to pull your shoulders.
We've got other people you can trust.
Yeah. No, and then I anticipating this coming. I asked Mr. Falsey what percentage of the state collected alcohol tax actually comes from sales here. I remember the number is around 6 or 7 million. And not instead of this, but in addition to it, we ought to think about the wisdom of petitioning the state to rebate that $6 million that comes from our citizens for addressing lots of issues. That's separate, not instead of. This is marvelously well prepared. You might even have convinced me.
That's the goal.
But well done, well thought out.
Thank you, Mr. Dyson. Mr. Trainee?
Well, do we have somebody here from legal, the police department, who can talk to us about the impact of alcohol on the police department, their calls?
We have Captain Curl here, and we have Becky Wynn-Pearson, who, from legal, would be able to address either of those issues. Curl is in charge of the CAP team and the work that they do, so if you have specific questions, he might be able to answer.
Captain, you come forward and identify yourself. for the record.
My question is, the problem of alcohol and crime out there, how relevant is alcohol use, misuse, to the crime that you guys deal with?
Can you identify yourself for the record, please?
I'm Captain Mike Curl, KPRLA. I would say that alcohol or drugs together, either one of them, contribute to 90% of them.
90%?
It's a related factor in about 90%. That's just an estimate on my part. I can't give you specifics, but the majority of crimes that are committed have an alcohol or drug facet to them.
Thank you.
Ms.
Well, I
Brown.
appreciate that. It's just, when we take a look at what we're doing now, we tax marijuana at 5%. If alcohol's a drug, it should be taxed at the same exact rate that marijuana is. But I'll save that for debate. Thanks, Donna.
In the state of Alaska, to speak to one of the points that Captain Curl brought up, in the state of Alaska, the number of EMS transports, the percentage of EMS transports related to alcohol is 7.3%. The percentage of EMS transports related to opioids is 1.5.
Thank you, Ms. Browse. Ms. Wynn-Pearson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. By way of additional response to Mr. Trainey's question, I don't have exact numbers with me today, but if you want to think about where municipal resources are going in terms of prosecution, the misdemeanors that our prosecutors are looking at are primarily DUIs and domestic violence offenses, both of which are very heavily tied to alcohol use. That's important. So again, I don't have specific numbers with me today, nor do I have somebody from prosecution. If you want additional details, I could certainly find those. But in terms of the resources the municipalities spending on prosecution, they are largely related to alcohol.
The Uniform Crime Report from 2017 has, I believe, 1,151 DUIs within the municipality of Anchorage. Those didn't necessarily result in collisions or fatalities, thank God, but they were prevented from creating collisions and fatalities by the Anchorage Police Department.
Thank you, Ms. Browse. So we have an S version that's also on the table here. I'd like us to discuss it before we end the work session. There's just one S version, is that right? Did you have an S version?
I did not.
Okay, so Mr. Weddleton, you have an S version. Everyone should have it in front of you. Would you like to present your version here?
Yeah, I would, and it's, I think we all know alcohol is drinking and spend less time proving that, but kind of take it was presented in the previous one, and I believe I just simply improved it, not really harmed the goals at all. One aspect is that it would start at 2%, but by the assembly could raise it up to 5% when we had some project type of associated with it. So what we would do now is gather, if we got $15 million all of a sudden, we really have the correct way to spend that now.
We do.
Okay. And if we do, then it will start at 5% because the assembly would say we approve these projects and we will start paying this towards it. So it gives us a lot of flexibility, but it would start at 2 until we were shown exactly where the money would be spent and we approved those projects. It would remove public safety from the uses. Not that I'm against the public safety, but if we're going to be accused of a run around the tax cap, it would be that, because it's going to be, okay, so we're just going to use this to fund the police and the fire and not really deal with these issues. Probably not true, we wouldn't do that, but I think the public would have a fair case to suspect that could happen. Public safety is 40% of our budget, just police and fire, so it's already a big chunk, so we would be really open to being accused of that. And to meet the goals of dealing with problems of alcohol use and the core causes of it, we don't need that in there. So I don't think it really harms the ordinance to pull that phrase out. On some things like a detox recovery center or shelter, we would say we could only spend up to 50% of the cost of those. And the reason is we are the hub city, and we have a big problem in the state because this is where people go when they have these problems. Were we to build a detox center, a shelter, or another nice homeless shelter, we would increase our attractiveness as the place to send people. Got a friend in Seward, they had a public meeting on homelessness. I said, really, got homelessness? What do you do with them? Oh, we send them to Anchorage. We know that goes on, okay? So this would be coaxing out money from other sources. Hopefully the state, like Fred said, is like, we want some of that back, but we'll go halves with you, okay? But we don't want to do the whole thing. Or it could be even nonprofits, Catholic social services. We open a new shelter, we'll pay half if you it gets rid of the 60%. I mean, restores the 60% threshold because I think this is a good idea and it will pass, just like ML&P passed easily beyond 60%. It also states a reporting requirement, which is just overt. I mean, I suspect we can ask for any report we want anytime we'll get it, but it just makes it overt. We will get an annual report on it. And I think that's the gist of it. So I don't see it as taking away. I just think it's clarifying some things and not adding additional work.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Where is your language on the reporting? Is that D?
Big star letter somewhere.
Yes, it's section D on page 2.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a pretty good idea. Does your administration have a response to the S version?
Yes. I think Mr. Weddleton is well-intentioned in his amendments. One of the issues that we have is putting this in the ballot language means that it is limited in that way only. The things that you're proposing you can do at the assembly level after the ballot language has been approved on a project-by-project basis. If we ever brought you a project to build a center for treatment, that limitation could be put on there. I will tell you that this administration, and I believe every other administration, will try and find every other source of funds that is possible to contribute to building new buildings, funding programs, whether it's through the state, whether it's through nonprofits, whether it's through charitable contributions, whatever the circumstances are. A lot of the entities that currently provide services to the community that this is focused on are not funded by the government. They are funded by charitable contributions. So putting that in the ballot language and putting it into the charter is a little risky because it would severely limit your ability to do things in the future if you weren't able to secure additional funds for annual overflow shelter. Then you can't have it. But if you do it at the assembly level after the ballot language has been approved, you have much more flexibility in what you can and cannot allow.
Thank you, Ms. Browse. Go ahead, Mr. Weldon.
And not debating this. I mean, I wouldn't say your points are valid, but I'd say where this would go to the voters, these are the weaknesses that people will attack it on, and I think it addresses those because really it has to be approved by the voters in the first place, and I don't believe your version would be approved by the voters.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, we'll get into this in debate, but I think one of the primary positive features of the administration proposal is simplicity. I mean, it's relatively simple. You can read and understand it while on the ballot. And there's a lot of research that shows if you put we just had this with Stand for Salmon, right? There's a lot of research that shows that if the ballot initiative is too complicated, people just vote no. And yours is, to me, it appears significantly more complicated.
Not 8 pages.
Mr. Chairman, we can hear from Treasury the way that Mr. Weddleton's substitute version is structured is actually, I believe, and Treasury believes to be more complicating to the industry. Having to change their tax levies depending on the function of the assembly could create additional burden to them. But Bliss may have better information. I don't know if that's something the assembly is interested in.
Who?
Bliss Cruz from Treasury.
Is there a Bliss Cruz here?
Yes, she's behind the pillar.
Oh, okay. Hello. Do you have anything to add to that?
Not necessarily. I think Ona covered pretty well. The fluctuating tax rate can be difficult. Sorry. Fluctuating tax rates can be difficult because there's a notice period for the taxpayers, and there is also forms that need to be adjusted. The website has to be updated. There's a chance, since it's a monthly tax, that there could be some under assessment, which could also lead to under-reporting of taxes, which could also then lead to penalties and interest for the taxpayers for non-compliance.
Mr. Weddleton?
So, and as you would hear, because we recorded with far back at all. Just curious, so there's a question asked,
Sorry
I never
about
heard an
that.
answer, if someone wants to listen in, but, so I can understand that, but I would suspect that the industry would say, we'll learn how to deal with that, and we'll keep it at 2%, and we'll have to make 5 out the gate. If you could really clearly, it's like, we could say, oh, now it's June, it's gonna be 2.5%, August, we're making it 3. But extensively, we would really increase it, we have a project coming up, we're funding this recovery center, we know it'll cost, and it's happening, so we need to increase it. You do that January 1st or something there. I mean, you could do it complicated, but I wouldn't like.
And through the chair to Mr. Wendleton, the industry is not paying this tax. The residents of Anchorage and the people who visit Anchorage are paying this tax. The industry is paying to collect the tax. And that dollar amount is negligible in the almost $300 million of retail sales in the city of Anchorage.
Thank you, Ms. Browse. Mr. Peterson, and then I'd like to have a little bit of time for public comment before we go to the next work session. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And have we done an estimate as to how much of this tax might actually be paid by those that don't live in Anchorage, visitors, people who work somewhere else within Alaska?
That's a fuel tax.
Through the chair to Mr. Peterson, we don't have that number, but we can get that for you.
We have a gentleman approaching.
Oh, Eric.
About 7%.
There you go.
I'm sorry, could you come back, say your name?
My name is Eric Carson. I'm in Treasury.
Okay.
The estimate is 7%. It's a rough approximation based on our spending from the Alaska Visitor Statistics Program.
Great. So somewhere between 700,000 and $1 million of the total, probably. Yeah, Mr. Trainee.
Keep in mind that when we go with the tobacco tax, we were told by people, this will negatively impact Anchorage, and it hasn't. When we've done all our other taxes, we're told it negatively impacts Anchorage, from Vine Valley, they haven't. Things are pretty constant, people still purchase it.
Yeah. I'm certainly not going to go out to the bars in the valley.
To
Ms. Browse?
Mr. Trainee's point through the chair, Brown Jug supports this tax. Brown Jug is the largest retailer in the city and the state. And while there are, orders of magnitude of being the largest retailer, I'm pretty sure they crunched their numbers and figured out whether or not this was going to be a burden to them. The amount of money that this will cost the retailers is negligible compared to the amount of money that we will raise in resources to resolve the issues that this community is facing.
Thank you, Ms. Browse. Okay, so now we have about 6 minutes left before we go on to the next work session. Is there anyone from the public who would like to speak? We don't offer public testimony at work sessions, but when we have a little extra time, we can take some. This will be up on Tuesday, and that's when there will be traditional public testimony, and you'll be able to come and speak. Is there anyone who'd like to speak? Please identify yourself for the record.
Yeah, my name is Sarah Oates, O-A-T-E-S, President and CEO of Alaska Char. I would just like to make a few comments. First of all, there was a study done by UAA in 2009 called A Look at Homelessness in Alaska. And that study found that only 13% of the homeless in Anchorage had chronic substance abuse issues. That was prior to the opioid epidemic. And I think we all expect that that number has drastically increased since then, due in large part to the opioid crisis. Yet I don't see that there's any opioid tax being proposed. We talk about public safety being a significant percentage of our costs here at the municipality. 40% I think was the number that I heard, and I'd be curious to hear what percentage of those costs are opioid related. Additionally, it was brought up earlier that tobacco tax costs across government levels equate to over 100%. The same is also true for alcohol. The government makes more money on alcohol taxes than all 3 tiers of alcohol industry combined. So that's manufacturing, distributing, and retail. There's a lot of talk about putting money toward homelessness, and it's more than just an alcohol issue. Yet it seems like the Assembly wants to make this an alcohol issue. They expect the alcohol industry to be solely responsible for solving this issue. And I have a lot of friends room. My mission is to work collaboratively with the community, with public health and public safety sectors, and I intend to do that in years to come. But expecting just one industry to be solely responsible for this is not my answer.
Question from Mr. Constant.
Is Brown Jug a member of the organization?
Brown Jug is a member of the organization, yes. And using them as an example, you know, they're the #1 retailer in the state at the package store level, and so they can afford this tax. And that, I would argue that that's one retailer, and that doesn't represent all retailers across the country.
Thank you, Ms. Oates.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, and then Ms. Browse is also in the queue.
One brief, I'm sorry, can
No, you go ahead.
One brief thing you said the assembly wants to, that remains to be seen. Right? So see
I apologize.
later, but we've heard that you don't pay this tax. Why do you care? I mean, the consumer pays it, you just collect and pass it on. Why do you care?
It will be passed on to us. I mean, we will eat that tax. We're not going to increase our prices by 25 cents when it's easy to just charge $5 for a drink. Our membership will eat those costs.
I will say that hasn't been the case with the fuel tax we passed. In fact, before we even implemented the tax, they raised their prices. Ms. Browse?
I do want to say to Ms. Oates, this isn't intended to vilify or to punish the alcohol industry by any stretch of the imagination. That is not the goal. And we agree that alcohol is not the root cause of every problem in this community. We know that. You said, how much does opioids cost? You know, I mentioned the $1.84 billion cost to the state of Alaska for alcohol. Other substances are $1.2 billion combined. So alcohol is the leading cause of these negative externalities. But this is not a tax on the alcohol industry. We are asking the alcohol industry to act as a collection agent for the community who decides that this is important enough to fund these resources through this mechanism.
Thank you, Ms. Browse. I will say that I have explored the possibility of an opioid tax in the past, as have people at the state level, and you get a huge amount of pushback because that can be prescribed. And so it's very difficult to differentiate between sort of the prescription users who feel it is their only option and the people that abuse it. So it's difficult.
I just would like, Mr. Chair, clarify that even if the Assembly votes yes on Tuesday with 8 votes, that is not the Assembly levying a tax on it. That is the Assembly asking the voters whether or not they would like to levy a tax on alcohol. It should be really clear here that that's the action before the Assembly on Tuesday, not to levy a tax.
I also explored a tax on e-cigarettes because they are untaxed, but the amount of revenue raised would be very low, and people think it's a treatment option for some reason. Okay, even though it's very clearly not. Ms. Hall, do you want to speak?
Thanks very much. I'm Tiffany Hall. I'm the Executive Director of Recover Alaska, an organization that works to reduce excessive alcohol use and harms across the state. I hear where the industry is coming from, and I understand the concerns even financially, and I have zero financial gain in this tax. I'm really speaking on behalf of public health and safety interests in the state. This tax could be levied and all of the money could be put into a hole in the ground and lives would be saved. I don't want the money to go into a hole in the ground. I'd much rather it go to supporting prevention, treatment, and recovery supports, but it could go in a hole in the ground and lives would be saved. The harms of alcohol would be reduced. I have this impressive list of people who have recommended an alcohol tax: the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the National Academy of Medicine, the U.S. Surgeon General, the National Institute of Health, Substance Use and Mental Health Services Administration, the Community Preventative Services Task Force, the World Health Organization, and a global research study in the Lancet have all documented that alcohol misuse is a significant problem in America, and that alcohol taxes is a proven way to combat underage and binge drinking especially. So that's where the elasticity lies. They're directly correlated with decreased deaths, traffic accidents, interpersonal violence, and crime. And just to also call out, I can also understand that it really feels like an attack on the alcohol industry because we're not. taxing somebody else to try to deal with this problem. But those of us who are in this field have been having to step up and work harder on the harms caused by alcohol in the state. The last time it was increased was 2002, and it was not indexed for inflation, so at that point it was 60 cents for a 6-pack of beer. Effectively, well, it could have been 82 cents per pack of beer now if it were indexed, but it wasn't, so effectively taxes are going down on alcohol. I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you, Ms. Hall. I think we have time for one more. Would anyone else like to speak? Go ahead, Sylvia.
My name is Sylvia Blondines. I'm the executive.
Yeah, come closer to the recorder, please.
Thank you. My name is Sylvia Blondines. I'm the executive director of the Alaska Hospitality Retailers. You know, listening to this conversation and the presentation, if I recall correctly, about 3 years ago, the Fairview Business Administration went to Juneau and they worked very hard to get $40 million to come funnel to the city of Anchorage, which at that time, those particular dollars were supposed to go towards substance abuse and chronic inebriation. Somehow the monies were taken away that were going to those specific issues that the Fairview Business Administration wanted to work on, and they disseminated and they went somewhere else, which to today's date, we don't know where those $4 million went to, okay? That's a big concern to the industry. A 60% vote, we know it's gonna go to the voters, so a 60% vote is where it should go. You need to, truthfully, you need to respect the citizens of Alaska, of Anchorage, and the fact that the citizens voted 20 years ago to get this tax levy to go up to 60% of the charge. It's important that you honor that for us, the citizens. Just to throw out, Brown Jug of Alaska is based out of Canada. They're not Alaskans. Our small businesses, my members, our members, are from Alaska, Anchorage based. Dedicated dollars, that's really good. We need to do that. We need to make sure that we have those dollars dedicated and where they're going to go, and maybe some data collected that we can see where those dollars are going to, including the nonprofits. Just because you dedicate $1 million to go XYZ nonprofit, we want to see where those dollars were spent at the nonprofit level. That's really, really important. Lastly, Anchorage is the hub of the whole state. Like Mr. Weldon was saying, we're going to have all peoples coming from everywhere in Alaska to house in Anchorage. Why do the Anchorage residents, the businesses, our licensees, have to pay for something that's a statewide issue? Thank you.
Thank you. All right, with that, closing this work session.